Welcome to another episode in our All About Ladybirds series, where today we look at the Harlequin Ladybird, otherwise known as Harmonia axyridis, which is a member of the family Coccinidae, which is the beetle family. Who would have thought that this cheeky face belonged to a prolific invasive ladybird, causing the rapid decline and displacement of our traditional native two-spot ladybird? By the end of today's deep dive, you too will become an expert on the life cycle, biology and identification of the multiple colour variation and spot configurations or forms that the Harlequin exhibits. Those forms include Succinia with the orange-red base layer and multiple spots with an M or W face. The easy recognisable form Conspicua, as the name suggests, with spots within spots. And finally the form Spectibulus, which has 4 spots, the 2 shoulder spots having indentations or metaphorically a bite taken out. Confused? Well, probably not. They are 3D macro rotations for each of the forms coming up. So let us outline the key ID features of the Harlequin. Its size and shape. It is a little larger than the native 7-spot at 6 to 8mm in length, and when viewed in profile is larger and more globular or dome-shaped. The next key characteristic is the markings on the face, which are either M-shaped or W-shaped depending on which angle you view it from, but the main characteristic is that the cheeks of the Harlequin are white. The next identification feature is the 4 spots along the edge of the pronotum or shoulders, and typically they are a row of 4 spots. Final identification characteristic, which is a good pointer, is that the Harlequin contains brown legs or ochreous browny orange legs, and the same for the ventral underside. Harlequins have a long phenology seen between the months of April and October, usually in 2 generations, but sometimes in 4 in good summers. Of course, beneath the toughened red and black spotted electa, there is 2 pairs of wings which enable the ladybird to fly. So, let's take a look at the 3 commonest forms of the Harlequin, the form Succinia, Conspicua and Spectibulus. The form Succinia can have between 0 and 22 spots on an orange or red ground colour. The form Succinia is probably the commonest form of the Harlequin seen, and it can take up to 5 hours for the spots to develop shortly after pupation when it is in the tenaral form. Next up is the form Conspicua, and living up to his name, it is a particularly notable ladybird with spots within spots. However, it still retains the characteristic identification of the white cheeks of the Harlequin ladybird. Turning our attention now to the form Spectibulus, which consists of 2 larger red spots with indents, or in inverted commas bite marks, and 2 lower spots. Care should be taken not to confuse the form Spectibulus with the kidney spot ladybird or the pine ladybird, the former being about 5mm and the latter being 3 to 4, and they are therefore much smaller than the Harlequin, and in the case of the kidney spot it has an all black face. The 2 lower red spots on the form Spectibulus sometimes can be absent. The life cycle of the Harlequin follows a simple 4-stage process: egg, larva, pupa and adult. As pointed out in previous episodes, the species of ladybird with a little experience can be identified by its larvae. After the eggs are laid, there are 5 larval stages before it pupates. Each female produces between 20 to 50 eggs per day and up to 1,000 to 4,000 in their lifetime. The species is generally bivoltine, meaning 2 generations per year, but in a good summer it can produce 4 generations per year in favourable conditions. As stated, ladybirds can be identified from their larval state, and there is a link to such a chart in the description beneath the video, which can be downloaded. The following images are pictures of the larvae of the Harlequin Ladybird, which can be identified by the position and colour of the tegel plates. As these larvae move through their 5 development stages, they have a voracious appetite for aphids. Okay folks, welcome back to another episode in our British Ladybird series, where today we're going to be looking at the Harlequin Ladybird. The ladybirds in the UK, we have 47 species, 24 of which are conspicuous and 23 inconspicuous. That is to say, they're often unnoticed and rarely seen underfoot. And we may do a future episode on the inconspicuous ladybirds. The conspicuous ladybirds involve obviously the red and black spot forms, which are the 2-spot, the 7-spot, the 10-spot and the variable harlequin, and not to exclude the cream-streaked and orange, as well as the only 2 yellow species, which is the 14 and 22 spot. So in today's episode we will be attempting to find a colony of harlequin, but based on where we are today and the excessive heat wave, I think it's unlikely that we're going to find them. However, notwithstanding, we have brought 2 very large friends to recap and illustrate the anatomy of the ladybird. So going back to the start of the episode, let's look at the 4 key identification characteristics that enable us to identify the harlequin. The first identification characteristic involves this W mark on its face. I don't know if the camera can see that, but you can see a very distinct W. And of course, if we view it from above, that W becomes an M. And characteristic of the carapace or face, we have these white cheeks just on the edge. So the first characteristic of the harlequin is its face. The next characteristic that we come across when we look at the harlequin is it's usually got 4 spots across the shoulder, or pronotum, which is another key to its identification. The third characteristic is if we look at the harlequin from the side, it is a much larger and globular ladybird than the traditional native 7-spot. So the size is a key indicator as well. And the fourth and final sort of pointer to the harlequin is if we look at the legs and the ventral surface, that's more like the ventral surface, the leg colour will be a nocris brown or an orangey brown colour, and that is very indicative of the Harlequin ladybird. So those are the 4 key identification characteristics of this species, which we've covered at the start of the video. So what we're now going to do is move out of this blistering sun and go into the base of the stream valley just behind me, and we're going to do some question and answer sessions. I think the 4 key questions that you may have in your mind are as follows. How did the Harlequin ladybird get to the UK? Why is it so successful? Why does the harlequin swarm, as indeed most ladybirds do? And why is it called the harlequin? So join me in the next segment where we find somewhere cooler to answer those questions. Okay folks, we've come upon another good spot in this woodland stream where we can tell the story of the harlequin. And the first question that arises is, how did it get here into British shores? And the short answer to that question is, we brought it. Traditionally, the Harlequin Ladybird was used in North America in the early 80s, 1982, 1983, where it was used as a pest control of its natural prey, the aphids, which the harlequin has a voracious appetite. Now, all seemed well, and it was introduced into peach orchards and various other crops of significance. And it wasn't long before it made its way into Central Europe, France in particular, where it was used in hop farms and vineyards. And once in Central Europe, it was just a short leap over the channel before it colonised the United Kingdom. And that occurred in a number of ways. The ladybird hibernates. It often makes its way into the crevices of agricultural products, suitcases, vehicles or anything else. And that's before we also consider the fact that the ladybird disperses itself because it has wings beneath this shiny elytra. So there are lots and lots of reasons why and how the ladybird reached the shores of the United Kingdom. However, it wasn't until 2000 and 2004 that biodiversity data threw up a problem, because the rapid increase in harlequin population was associated with rapid decline on our British ladybird species, notably Adala bipunctata, which is the two-spot ladybird, which was seen to drastically decline. So that is the impact of the harlequin, which is deemed to be an invasive. And the harlequin has been rather like the Himalayan balsam, which you can see behind me, insofar as no one predicted the fact that a biological control agent in its own right could become an invasive problem. So folks, I hope you can hear me clearly. We are in a small stream or waterfall where we will look at the next question in our series, which is, why is the harlequin so successful? And the short answer to that is it out-competes, out-eats, out-flies and out-reproduces the traditional native British species. So, when we covered the harlequin earlier in the video, we mentioned that a typical female can produce between 30 and 70 eggs per day. And in her entire lifetime, that amount can be up to 4,000. So you can see by reproduction alone that the harlequin is incredibly good at mastering reproduction, and it normally has 2 generations per year, which is 5 molting, but it can have up to 4. So in terms of geometrical progressions, you can imagine how the population grows over a typically good summer. And when we couple that with the fact that the harlequin can disperse beyond its range because it has wings. So the success of the harlequin can be attributed to its reproductive ability. And if we look at, for example, the grey squirrel, which took about 100 years to colonise the shores of the United Kingdom, the Harlequin invasive managed to populate the entire United Kingdom within 20 or so years. And we covered that in our first question as to why it is so successful. So again, the Harlequin out-eats, outruns, outflies our traditional native species. So folks, again I'm resorting to the Bluetooth mic because of the background river noise. And the next question, question 3 that we're going to ask is, why do ladybirds swarm? And there are two circumstances which we may see harlequins swarm. The first circumstance is when the aphid life cycles or populations peak and there is ample food and the air temperature is hot, which promotes the insect's metabolism. So we may see an aggregation of harlequins who congregate together and then suddenly take flight to expand their range, making the best of food resources and hot temperatures to be able to fly. So that's the first circumstance where we might see a swarm, and we typically see that on UK beaches. Now the second circumstance that we may see ladybird swarm is towards the end of the season, where we get a series of perhaps hot and cold spells in August, September, October or November. So this hot and cold exposure to temperature suddenly makes the ladybird susceptible to going into diapause or to preparing itself for hibernization. And once it has one or two cold spells and a final warm spell, it will again aggregate, take flight, and on this occasion seek suitable hiding spots where it can overwinter and hibernate. And such spots include roof voids, tree trunks, in the stems of vegetation, anywhere where it is dark and sheltered and can maintain a constant temperature until it emerges next spring. So again, in summary, two reasons for swarming. The first is to make the best of food resources and temperatures to expand its range, and the second, hot and cold exposure towards the end of the season, where it will then decide to hibernate and emerge for the following season.
So folks, perhaps the most obvious question, why is the harlequin called the harlequin? The name has its origins in French folklore and passion plays in and around the 10th and 11th century. Vitalis in the 11th century recalls the tale of a monk who encounters a troop of demons and tormented souls wandering the coast of Normandy. These demons were led by a masked, red-faced, club-wielding giant and were known as the family Harlequin. The Harlequin character was adapted into a series of Italian plays in the 16th century, where the Harlequin took the form of a checkered costume jester or servant. The popularity of this Italian theatrical performance and the colourful costume is responsible for the perpetuation of the character as we know it today. And the role of the Harlequin is that of a comic servant or jester, and in many ways is equivalent to a historic Jeeves and Wooster. So, in summary, the Harlequin was named after the colourful checkered costume of the theatrical actor, resembling the spots and shapes of the Harlequin's markings.
Well folks, this sunny glade in a native British woodland seems a great place to identify the fifth question. Where can you find the Harlequin? And whilst we haven't found any today, here are some top tips in locating them. look under the leaves, particularly of sycamore. These are actually beech, but look under sycamore leaves, as they are often rich in aphid and aphid dew, and they attract many ladybirds, notably the most common form, the harlequin. Another tip is to look on the undersides of flower heads such as hogweed and cow parsley, and any general floristic. And in terms of where to look, an absolutely good tip is to identify a council garden waste centre or garden waste handling area and find the paths and corridors around it. And these often are very rich in harlequin colonies as they disperse outward from the waste facilities. So those are 3 tips in actually locating the harlequin. And in today's episode, where we're relying on these, we're not really going to need the magnifying loupe. So that's just a few tips of identifying the harlequin. We haven't found any today, possibly due to the habitat that we're in and the extreme weather conditions, it being July 2026 in the second phase of a heat wave.
Okay folks, I hope you've enjoyed this little video on our British ladybirds, and you can join me for others in the series where we hope to cover the 2 spot, the 7 spot, the 10 spot, the cream streak, the orange, and the 2 yellow ladybirds, the 14 and the 22 spot, as part of our conspicuous ladybird series. So if you have liked or enjoyed this video, please like, share or subscribe, and join me on the next episode where we will look at other species. Once again, thank you very much indeed for watching.